So we're looking here at local produce in school canteens and how to structure the local sector. I think that in what we've heard this morning, there is clearly a lack of definitions for a certain number of things, and in particular, what is local. And I hope that we will shed some light on this question of what local is. So Valérie BARRE will introduce the topic. She represents the ARPE, which is a regional agency for the environment. She's going to be talking about the legal framework, I believe. Then we have Pascale FALCO, who introduced himself earlier on, and she will be presenting the strategy of the city of Marseille, so very practical aspects. And Mr. Fortuna, who manages the central kitchen in for the school canteens in the city of Avignon. He'll be talking about his everyday work. So, Mrs. BARRE, if you would like to take the floor, so I would ask you to not take too much time so that we can keep some time for discussions afterwards. Yes, good afternoon. So the Regional Agency for the Environment and Biodiversity works on sustainable buying methods, because we noticed that in the local authorities that we worked with, there was a real obstacle in terms of public tenders allowing them to buy good quality food which was produced locally. Therefore, within this framework, in 2015, we organized a work group with local authorities which are here, and people who are here, in particular Guylaine Perriot from Les Parcs, but also Albert Almerdine. And we drew inspiration from these structures, which had already worked on drawing up public tenders that allowed them to include or not exclude local providers. Therefore, we drew up a handbook on public tenders for foodstuffs, which include the principle of short circuits and sustainable development. This brings me back to the notion of local. It's true that in the law of public tenders, we are not allowed to talk about anything local. We talk about short circuits. So a short circuit means that there is maximum one intermediate between the producer and the consumer. That is the criterion that the public buyer can use in order to make sure that the local producers are not excluded from their public tenders. There are other elements. So the ARPE is there to support local authorities, to help them find solutions so that they can buy quality produce, sometimes local produce, so to avoid bringing organic produce from another country. That would not be very coherent with regard to the approach of a local authority, which, when they wish to include sustainable development practices or improve nutrition in their canteen, they necessarily wish to work with local producers and not necessarily right next door. But that really does depend on what area we're talking about, because each local authority is a unique case. There is no one magic tool for everybody, a public tender that is perfect for everybody. It's really up to each local authority to find their solution to improve their mass catering. So, maybe you can give us some examples of the differences between different authorities. Why not centralize the norm? Well, we'll see this later on. We have two very large local authorities. It's true that there are small local authorities. The town of Loris in the Vaucluse department, for example, which is a very small structure. There are 200 meals per day, I believe. And therefore, they use the AgriLocal 84 platform, or they directly buy from local producers. So they've been through this process of sourcing to see which producers were able to meet their needs. And therefore, we try to really include this in the purchasing process. So it's easy for them because the law of public tenders means that below 25,000 euros you can buy directly from the producers. That makes it a lot easier. Today we're talking about raising this threshold to 40,000 euros across France. This will no doubt facilitate things for middle schools or high schools, but also for small local authorities. And for other authorities, they will necessarily have to respect the rules of public tenders, and therefore will have to find solutions to adapt. But each local authority is unique. We really are talking about sustainable collective catering as a whole. So earlier on we talked about nutritional aspects, we talked about food waste, we've talked about the conditions in which the children eat their meals. And really, mass catering must be taken in, must be considered as a whole, and really see where we stand today. Does the kitchen have a vegetable processing unit? Do they use frozen or ready-made meals? And we can't go from nothing to everything from one day to the next. For all local authorities, it must be a progressive process. And of course, we must bear in mind the regulations, because there are objectives to be fulfilled by 2022 and sometimes even 2025 with plastic containers. We haven't talked about that, but that's also a part of the problem. So it's really something we really need to adopt an overall approach. We must develop a project method within the authorities.
Okay. Closeness isn't only is in one commune. You need to define it well. Local. We can't really put it in our tenders, in our call for tenders. We can't use that term local. But generally, local authorities do manage to source locally, despite the fact that we've got to respect these guidelines. And there are certain elements that we have to respect, and there are some tools that do exist for us. I would think that the biggest limitation is in terms of time, because the local authority has to spend quite a lot of time finding out what exists in the territory, who the producers are, how much they can produce, how they work. All of the producers are not able to satisfy the needs of a local authority because the local authorities have their constraints, i.e. they mustn't take carrots with sand or soil on them, their lettuces have to be sparkling clean. There's all kinds of factors to be taken into consideration. And it's important to get people to meet together so that both sides meet one another, so we can step in and bring them together. It's very important. There's Pauline and Albert have got a role to play because in the department, because they bring parties together. They bring local authorities together with the growers to work on these public contracts, to ensure that the different criteria are taken into consideration. The goal is always the same. The goal is always to make sure that children are eating better quality meals. So let's see what the city of Marseille has to say about this. Yes, my name is Pascale FALCO from the city of Marseille. if we want to be self-sufficient, we have to take into account that we have over 60,000 inhabitants. We've got a Mediterranean client. We have a geographical constraint because to the south we have the sea. We also have our creeks, which are known as the calanques. It's great for going strolling and hiking, but you can't grow anything there. And then there is a plain where we have goats grazing, and we have some farming land in the Vallée du Von. So we've got quite a few constraints to cope with, and that means that given the number of people that we have, we cannot source exclusively from our zone. To extend our zone is a possibility, i.e. PACA, the PACA region to the east, the Corsica also, and the Gard. By extending our zone to include these places, it means that we can have local food which is of good quality. So we serve 43,000 school meals a day, 6 million a year. We're responsible, and we've got a contract from the state between 2016 and 2020. We work with a company called Sodexo, and Sodexo isn't the big bad wolf in all this, because in our market we've got specs to respect. We can put in our specs what we want. It's got to be a partnership. If I let a private company do whatever they want with this contract, then they will not be serving the meals I'm hoping for. However, by working together, we manage to raise the bar and provide meals of a good quality in Marseille. 50% of our food is 50% of the number of ingredients are organic. We have a small budget. In 2015, we started work to bring organics onto our plates. So we are looking forward. When you're working on a contract, 2015 we were already thinking about what we wanted in 2025. So we've got 15% of the ingredients are organic, 20% is local. We're going to increase to 50% local by 2050. And organic is organics from France. And how do we manage to do that? Because we have the giants of the food industry on our doorstep, but it is our strength and it is also our weakness. Our strength is that 50,000 meals per day is lucrative. It's interesting for the providers. So when we are negotiating, we're negotiating in big quantities, so that can impact on the price. But if you're making 50,000 meals a day, we serve bull from the Camargue region, but to feed all of our children in Marseille a meal with these bulls, you need like 40 big bulls to carve up. So we limited 1 meal per year of this bull from the Camargue. So volume can be an advantage when you're negotiating prices, but it can also be an inconvenience when you want to serve a specific dish. So we try to work with growers in order to generate employment. Let me take the example of Mademoiselle de Provence. It's a company that makes pasta. Mademoiselle de Provence has got their own wheat fields, their own mill, which mills 250 kilos of flour per day, and the company makes their own pasta. Yes, one day the owner was watching the television, saw a report about Sodexo, and she said, well, I would like the children in schools to eat our pasta. So she wrote to Sodexo. Sodexo decided to work with them, and so we serve their pasta. When she serves us pasta, then it takes her 3 weeks to provide us all with all the pasta we need for one meal. So it means that this company is thriving. She's got regular income, and she also has created a job for somebody. So that is interesting too and very important. I think that mass catering can generate jobs and can be part of the economy. I think that's very valuable. There's another aspect of this story with Mademoiselle de Provence, that the woman who started the business comes to one of the schools when we're serving her pasta, and she meets the children. So the children meet the producer, because when you see her pasta, it's brown, it's dark brown, it's wholemeal pasta, and the children aren't used to that, so it enables the children to understand why the pasta is that colour. She shows them photos of her wheat fields, she explains everything to her. And so that means that these children, who often can live in council estates full of tower blocks, they can see that pasta does not grow in a bag, it doesn't grow at the local hypermarket, that really is a grain, there's a plant behind it. So I feel that this is very important in the notion of locality. Children need to understand what good food is and how good food is grown. In Marseille, as well as the pasta, we have also set great store by seasons. We do not serve tomatoes in January, out of the question. In the month of September, twice a week, the children will have grapes, kiwis, tangerines, and the rest will be Christmas time, and they'll eat those fruit in season for 2 or 3 months. That's the way we try to work. We've got some room for manoeuvre. We realise that if we want to eat locally, if we want to eat according to the seasons, if we want organics, if we want no additives, then we have to slacken up on certain other criteria. 2 years ago, for example, there were some heavy rains throughout the spring. There was a lot of mildew on the grapes, so in September we only had 1 or 2 meals with grapes. We did not penalise the company for that. We knew that the weather had made it impossible to serve grapes. We served other organic fruits because we had late melons that year for the same weather reasons. So we do try to adapt ourselves. The competitions market once told us that we are a cruise boat and we drive like we're in a Ferrari. We have to be able to react quickly. We've got a huge mass that we have to maneuver, but we have to react quickly. We've developed all kinds of industries. We do without additives. We have a partner, Sodexo, but we keep an eye on what they're doing. We wanted to reduce the number of additives, particularly in the pastries, cakes and pastries. So we had some tart pastry that cannot be made in the pastry workshop. We're redesigning our workshops at the central kitchen. And so we have 8,000 tart cases that we have to make, but we cannot make them ourselves because of the building work that's going on. So we could only use these tart cases with additives. We didn't want the additives, but we said, well, if that's the case, we're just not going to serve tarts at all. That was not very popular. However, it obliged our provider to find a solution. So they found a company in the vicinity near to Aubagne who rose to the challenge and changed their recipe for tart cases without any additives, and which are local. So to wrap up, because I don't have very much time, I would just say that when you work with your partners, with the institutions and private partners, and also local authorities, if the local authorities get together and work collaboratively out in the field, everyone can help each other, we can all find the right solutions and share those solutions, and then we can also highlight what the difficulties are. Oh, a second point, a second thing which is interesting to point out, you're saying that there's Sodexo, but there are other companies, of course. Sodexo is doing local. But we heard earlier on that it's illegal to do local. Second point, what about the impact on the cost of what you are obliging Sodexo to do in terms of quality? Is there a difference in price? Well, the cost of price is 50,000 meals a day, 6 million a year, and Sodexo is the #1 mass catering company in the world. Two companies gave a tender, and Sodexo won the contract. We couldn't get any groups of providers. We would have liked a group of providers, but that wasn't possible. It's had no impact on the price. That's the positive thing about serving so many meals. The first day of negotiations, when we were just talking, we got 50% organics in the first year. And if one of those companies grants you 50% of organic ingredients, then you push the other tenderer to do the same. The fact that we are enormous, because we are enormous, then it makes us very attractive to these big catering companies. And so there has been no impact on the cost. Now, what about local now? Localness. When we asked different organisations to meet our specifications, we gave specifications with a contract price, and we gave them different guidelines, and we said we will pay great attention to the proposals that you will put forward in terms of short chains, labels, and we really pushed them in that direction. The companies came back to us, and they themselves fostered the local aspect. We didn't really have to push them very far. I think it's because point one, it's very popular today, and point two, that we're a great calling card. If a big catering company goes to call on future clients, other local authorities, and they can say that they work with Vitacroc, Aragon, all these names, then it's part of their communication strategy. So it's in their interest to play the game. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Hugues FORTUNA. I run the central kitchen in Avignon. So before I get down to the nitty-gritty, some questions which had been put for me ahead of this meeting, I would first of all like to specify what a central kitchen is, because a central kitchen is a bit of a generic term. A central kitchen in France can produce 500 or 600 meals or 55,000 meals per day. So this generic term can be a bit scary, and we'll see that very, very quickly, because the city of Marseille produces 50,000 meals a day. We produce up to 5,000 per day, so we are 10 times smaller than Marseille. So that was important to point out. So each local authority is in a specific market, and they have their own policies, of course. There's not one solution suits all by any means. One of the questions that were put to me was, how did you qualify the different products, and what's the availability of these products? Well, the first thing to be said is that you need to identify the strong points of each region. Of course, there are big differences throughout France. But we saw Guadeloupe this morning, we heard from Guadeloupe, and we know that no matter where you are in France, we're all very educated people, and when we're talking about sourcing foodstuffs locally, one has the notion, not necessarily of territory, but there's a French term, terroir, which is really the soil that your plants grow in, for example. A terroir is a historical term. It has a past, it has a history. There are conditions of the soil, of the climate, of the traditional practices. So you could eat, for example, in one region it will be cabbage, elsewhere it will be meat, elsewhere it will be dairy produce. And that's why it really is important not to forget that. And trying to identify a model for the entire country of France, well, it's just a pipe dream. When you make an exhaustive inventory of what we can find in France, well, it's amazing. You can see how diverse everything is around your immediate vicinity. A town which serves 50,000 school meals a day is not the same thing as a town that serves 5,000 school meals a day. So we're all different. So we did an inventory in Avignon, and we noted that apart from plants, there was a whole variety of needs that we managed to list and analyse in our central kitchen. This morning there was a round table with Alice Blier, who works with us today, and she does a business that I do not know how to do. For example, at a central kitchen, you don't know how to decontaminate your vegetables, but you know how to peel your vegetables. So in this inventory, I not only listed all of the growers and producers, but also those who process the food. There's an entire fabric that has to be taken into account. But an inventory is worthless if you don't meet the people. What drives us to work together is the fact of moving forward together. Our aim isn't to completely transform the business model of farming today. We have drawn up an inventory of what exists. There are different types of structures in Avignon. There are the socially supported producers, and you also have the local authority, which was involved in the Avignon project, which we heard about also, identifying which growers want to work with us. And the only way that one can identify these partnerships, the only way we can inspire everyone to work together is quite simply to identify what the hurdles are, what the constraints are, and what is preventing us from working together. And very quickly one realizes that the constraint for one person is a strong point for another. So we've got these public contracts, these procurement contracts, of course, we've talked about those. Public procurement cannot write in their call for tenders that they want to work locally. That has to be avoided. Well, this morning we've heard a whole list of strategies for getting around that. You can skirt around it, it is possible. But above and beyond that, when we want to work together, for the grower, for the farmer, you need to know about the soil. The soil needs time before it can give you what you're hoping to grow. And in the central kitchen, they need volumes, and they need it right now. Our constraint is to adhere to the regulations and to present our list of menus to the parents and the schools. We have to make sure that they're all very balanced meals. And within that framework, if we present things sufficiently ahead of time, then a constraint can be turned into an opportunity to signal to the grower that you'd be really happy to have 58 kilos of courgettes in week 45, and that will encourage the grower to plant so many courgette plants to be able to satisfy that. And it's this kind of relationship will ensure that we will be able to work together. This notion of local, as far as we're concerned in Avignon, it's mainly in terms of plants, but a meal is more than plants. There might be dairy, there'll probably be meat. And so we realize that this concentric circle around our point of departure, I think we've determined 150 kilometers. We try to respect that, but we can't always respect that because the product is not found within that perimeter. So we look a little bit further outside our circle, but you have to accept that. It's impossible to claim that you can grow all of the ingredients in a short chain, or that means changing the local areas and turning the plains in Avignon into grazing land for cattle, but I don't really think that's the solution. So another question was, how does one organize placing your orders for local produce, and how do you satisfy public procurement requirements? Well, we were visited by organisers of a paperless platform which united consumers, producers, etc. And we realized that it was a very valuable platform because it enables us to do our sourcing, and it has really contributed to creating this inventory of what exists out in the land. This work has been carried out, and by meeting this organisation, we have been able to expand that. So this means that this knowledge enables the farmers to group together so that they can work with us. Above and beyond everything one might imagine in terms of regulations and the wealth of our territory, the major thing to do, the first thing to do, is to get to meet other people. And when a producer meets a consumer and a manufacturer, well, if the local authorities are on board too, then the sky's the limit. There was a third question, but I've already answered that one. So how do you deal with your needs in technical terms? Well, as I've already explained, the local offering is dependent on how available the products are, depending on the seasons. The city of Marseille takes this into consideration, as we've just heard. And the producer's ability to produce these quantities that can be much greater than some farms can actually produce. And that takes us back to this Alliville program, which is well placed to find solutions. For a central kitchen, you have to have a long-term view. Oh, I too have my jingle in the background. So there's a notion of ordering, of arranging our needs in chronological order. The earlier you can plan, the more able you will be to interest a grower, a farmer, a processor. Let's just think about that pasta maker who spends 3 weeks making pasta for a meal for Marseille school children. So diversity is great, but it means that you can't have a single model that applies to everybody. It doesn't work. It might be a guideline to start with, but for example, if you look at Marseille, if you look at its southern border, which you just see, it's not going to work. There's another town, La Seine-sur-Mer. They can do that because they only serve 5,000 meals a day, and their local territory, their mid-scale territory, is appropriate. They've got a central kitchen which sources itself locally. Thank you very much for listening. I just want to come back on one of the points that you made. I'm sure it's of interest to all three speakers. You were talking about we're not being here to change the world. We're not going to change the way farmers farm and logistics companies do their logistics things, but you can give recommendations in terms of quantities. How about if the city of Marseille is asking 20% of organics, that might encourage the farmers to change the way of farming. And so that, as a local player, you can change the way people do their business, the way they produce, they source, etc. You play a role in the transformation. It's absolutely clear that a public authority will give its recommendations, but we must just encourage. We already have a system full of constraints, the Egalim law, which determines quotas. But I don't think we can go out there on our own to encourage. I think we have to build things together, and that will ensure that these business models will evolve.
So not to move to a normative sector, yes. Yes, the Egalim law will, I believe, encourage things, and I think that Pauline can talk about this later on. But the Chambers of Agriculture are also encouraging the high environmental value among local producers. So Pierre Noël talked about it this morning also. This will also encourage farmers to have farming practices that are more respectful of the environment and to achieve 50% of quality products. And regarding the tools, because I know that there are tools that are implemented by Avignon, working with ARPE, there's also grouped purchasing, which is of interest. I don't know if you've done this for meat, but these are tools which allow certain massification for certain products. And this could be interesting in terms of price. So I don't know if Mr. Fortuna wanted to talk about this, but I thought that it was an interesting entry point for certain authorities to be able to come together, even in terms of logistics. I think that if a local authority can work with a middle school or a high school of a territory to make sure that the producer delivers to these schools, at the same time, it can be very helpful. So there's a certain adaptation that needs to be achieved on behalf of the buyers, and no doubt interaction with the farmer also. Both must come together, and this type of thing can improve the relationship between both. Any questions from the floor? We see that you're so enthusiastic.
Mark Steen, Salford University, Manchester. I have a couple of questions. One is about software and whether any communes actually use software in their kitchens so that if, for example, parents are paying for school meals, they can actually make the payment over the website, and this will mean that there's no need for the children to bring food into the school, to bring money into the schools, with of course the possibility that they might then use the money to buy not so healthy food, or indeed they might have the money stolen from them. And also, if you have the software, it's possible to predict better what your requirement for meals will be that particular day, and therefore reduce your food waste. The second question is about logistics, and it's rather more of an observation that in Sweden, a number of communes have set up coordinated distribution centres, so that there's a contract given to a distribution company to actually carry out all the distribution of all the food that's required for all the school kitchens. The norm in Sweden is that you have, in most communes, a school kitchen in every school, rather than central kitchens. In the UK, you also have, very often you have a large wholesaler will have a contract to actually distribute the food to school kitchens, including the food of smaller producers.
So I'm just going to answer with what I know. Most of the local authorities do indeed have software to manage numbers, that's for sure, and often to pay for the meals. There are family sections where people can log in and pay directly online. And we can also have the possibility for the families of opting out of a meal 10 days ahead of time or something like that. So that depends on the local authority. But in France, there are also group purchasing centres, not in our region. We work with platforms that group together a certain number of farmers, and we centralize products here. But that's the case of 06 à table in the Alpes-Maritimes, and there are other types of platforms to work with local farmers. But we don't have a central purchasing centre that is taken into account by the public authorities. In the Rhône-Alpes region, there is a central purchasing unit that was created to make sure that consumption was as local as possible. And so, yes, the management of numbers is related to waste management, of course. Yes, so each town in France manages the canteen for nursery and primary schools, and they manage this autonomously. So there are 36,000 towns, and there must be 36,000 different ways of doing things. In Marseille, we have an application. The families can pay on the web, either with the app on their smartphone or using their computer, or they can bring the check along. We don't take any cash. So the children do not handle cash. You can opt out of a meal on the very same day, and there is a pre-order for the month, but on the same day, on the given day, the child is not obliged to have lunch at school. The town has to know before 9 a.m. So we're currently thinking about this because considering the social and financial difficulties of certain families, we don't want to penalize them for a meal that is not eaten. But we also have the problem of dealing with waste, and meals that are produced and not eaten. That is a problem for us also. So I don't know if I've answered your question. So yes, to come back to the cost of a meal and the way we manage things for families, each town is entirely free to decide how much they will charge for their meals. There are two models that are prevalent. There's that of payment according to the family composition and income, so we take into account the notion of vulnerability or modest incomes of families, and what remains to be paid is paid for by the town. That is the case of Avignon, and we've maintained the cost of meals at the same level for the past 5 years. Then you have communes that make the choice of a single price, regardless of family incomes, for all children. So these factors will no doubt modify who actually eats their lunch at school or not. And all of this is indeed managed by software, and there are about as many softwares and apps as there are communes and school canteens. Regarding food waste, I would like to contribute some data which is important. The regulation on school canteens is managed by what we call the GRMCN, which strongly recommends a nutritional balance taking into account the number of quality meat products, there should be 4 of these in 20 consecutive meals, and they also oblige a minimum weight for each foodstuff. And there we see that the average weight of a meal served today in a school canteen is between 400 and 450 grams. Whereas the child's stomach contains less. So that means that we might be generating food waste because the meals are too large. And finally, regarding food waste, in Avignon, since 2015, we've been working on an operation which measures the amount and weight of food wasted in each school, and we identify the foodstuffs that are the most rejected, and we see that unfortunately vegetables are right up there at the top of the list. And I want to also come back to something you noted earlier on, is that the lunch break, in terms of its duration and the notion of quality and a peaceful environment, also strongly contributes to limiting food waste or really making it very minimal. The city of Avignon last year had an average food waste which was below 60 grams, whereas the national figure is 120 grams, which proves that when we all work together, right down to the schools and the people in charge of the different canteens, which are the last barrier because they're the people who dish up the meals, then they contribute to lowering this waste also.
Handover from the University of Exeter. I just wanted to make a comment from the UK perspective, and just to say that whilst in the UK we don't have a national food policy like you do in France, but we do have initiatives that are boosting the amount of local food in food procurement. So we have the Food for Life catering mark that is being used with hospitals and schools, and for the gold standard, 50% of the ingredients would have to be local. And linked to that, in recent weeks, with universities and local towns declaring a climate emergency, there's been new work between universities and researchers and local food initiatives to try and boost the supply of local and organic food into what we call anchor institutions like universities.